And the other speakers will join us virtually. Mr. Ryan Haas, Senior Fellow at the Michael H. Armakos Chair in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings Institute. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
So in Washington, it's still at night or in the afternoon? What time is in
It's
Washington?
evening. It's evening in Washington, but selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi. So, Mr. Ryan Haas is a Senior Fellow and the Michael Armakos Chair in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings Institute, where he holds a joint appointment to the John L. Thornton China Center and the Center for East Asia Policy Studies. He was part of the inaugural class of David Rubenstein Fellows at Brookings and is the non-resident affiliated fellow in the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale Law Institute. Has focused his research and analysis on enhancing policy development on the pressing political, economic, and security challenges facing the United States in East Asia. So welcome, Mr. Ryan Haas. So let's start presentation session from our speakers. Yeah? The first presentation will be from Mr. Ryan Haas. Yeah? Mr. Ryan Haas.
Oh. Yes, hello.
So you are in Washington or are you in Washington?
Yes, I'm in Washington.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I'm in Washington.
Yes. But it's still not hot in Washington because this is July, still summer in Washington.
That's right.
Okay, please, Mr. Ryan Haas, yeah, you will talk about a very important and interesting, I think, speech about the relation between economic and also maritime security. Yeah.
Well, Ambassador Bhakti, thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you also to the organizers of the Jakarta Geopolitical Forum for this opportunity to speak and to appear alongside such a distinguished group of panelists. I'm going to provide a perspective from Washington, D.C., because that's where I am. And I trust that my other colleagues on the panel will provide their own viewpoints as well, and that together we will be able to have a very rich discussion. My utmost goal is to try to surface a few ideas for how we might be able to lower risk and create space for common efforts to address regional and global challenges. If it's possible to use the PowerPoint presentation, I'd be delighted to, but if not, I can speak without it. My general sense is that we can go to the next slide. We are entering a period of significant geopolitical stress, arguably as large as any moment since the end of World War II. The international system is facing pandemics, a climate crisis, mounting debt challenges in many parts of the world, a global economic recession, food and energy insecurity, and all of these challenges are being exacerbated by intensifying competition between major powers. There is actual shooting taking place in Ukraine, sadly today, but in the Asia Pacific, there is also a competition that's well underway for strategic advantage, and that competition is intensifying. It has led my Brookings colleague, Bruce Jones, to describe the Western Pacific today as what East Germany was during the Cold War, the new fault line of geopolitical tensions. And this new fault line raises two proximate risks for all of us. The first is that it increases risk of confrontation and possibly conflict. But the second is that it limits space for major powers to lead collective efforts to address systemic challenges. Next slide. My sense is that maritime rivalry is likely to intensify in the coming years, and I'll offer 5 reasons why I think that's the case. The first is that for the first time since the 1500s, China is investing significantly in becoming a global naval power. and China is making rapid gains. Its investments are bearing fruit. And as China becomes stronger, I think that they likely will grow more risk acceptant in using maritime power to seek to achieve their strategic objectives. And at a minimum, I think it's safe to say that China would like to assert control over territory it claims in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and Taiwan. And this is going to place significant stress on stability in the Asia Pacific. The second reason why I think that, that maritime rivalry will intensify is that China's efforts along these lines will be aided by the introduction of new technologies. There will be increasing usage of unmanned platforms, of autonomous weapon systems, of sensor technology, and all of these new developments will amplify China's maritime strengths. Third, I expect that China will almost certainly seek to establish a string of naval bases to protect its sea lines of communication. As the former naval strategist Mehan earlier theorized, it is a requirement for a naval power to establish a string of bases to protect its sea lines of communication. China relies heavily upon fuel and food transiting through the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea. I expect that they will want to strengthen their capacity to protect those sea lines of communication. Fourth, it's clear that China and Russia are looking for ways to deepen their coordination and their naval presence, not just in Asia, but around the world. And this will add to this sense of rivalry. And at the same time, the United States and its partners are not standing idly by as all these developments take place. They're also developing their own capabilities to seek to counter China's naval buildup and to frustrate its ability to use or threaten force to achieve its strategic objectives. So the upshot is that there is a bit of a naval arms race underway in Asia right now. It does not just involve the United States and China, but it also involves many other actors, whether it's Australia, the United Kingdom, Japan, India. Many other countries are building up rapidly their naval capacity to meet this moment that we find ourselves in. Next slide. So given these parallel trends of both rising risks, but also rising stress in the international system, the question that I think confronts us is how can Asian actors limit risk and claw open space for coordination on common challenges? I don't think that there's any silver bullet solution to this problem. There's no near-term fix. But if a critical mass of countries pursue efforts to dampen risk of conflict and expand space for coordination, I think that it is possible for us to make progress. And I see four main lines of effort for us to do this. The first is to build consensus around international law. The second is to work on developing codes of conduct for operational behavior. The third is to work on developing more of a common operating picture for developments in the maritime domain. And also, alongside that, developing habits of cooperation as opportunities arise. And then lastly, I think it's important for genuine relationships to develop among key officials through the use of existing dialogue mechanisms, which maybe could be organized for greater effect. Next slide. So the first line of effort that I have put forward is to strengthen support for international law, particularly the United Nations UNCLOS. The United States, unfortunately, as an American, I have to say, we're not going to lead. We have not ratified UNCLOS, and we have no authority to exercise leadership in the space. So leadership is going to have to come from other states that have ratified the treaty and that have demonstrated a pattern of adherence to it. And I think it's important for there to be greater sort of convergence and consensus around key elements, such as the use of the arbitral tribunal for adjudication of disputes, and greater consensus around what navigational rights are available in other countries' exclusive economic zones and territorial seas. These efforts to forge a greater consensus by regional parties would help undergird support for the principles of freedom of navigation. And they would also help, I think, lessen the risk that issues around freedom of navigation will become subsumed and compartmented as an element of intensifying US-China rivalry. Next slide. The second main line of effort that I would put in front of you is to really intensify efforts to build codes of conduct for operational behavior and operational safety. I think in recent years, the region has made important progress in developing codes of conduct. For example, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium has developed the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, CUES. There has been a Malacca Strait Security Initiative. The United States and China have developed rules of behavior for encounters at sea and in the air. So there's steps that have been taken that can be built upon. And I hope that the region is able to build on these steps. But unfortunately, I'm not optimistic that progress is going to come from either the United States or China. Both the United States and China disagree on the sources of tension, and neither country, I'm afraid, appears to be in any mood to make progress at the moment in lowering risks. And so where can the rest of the region drive progress? I would suggest three areas. The first would be to clarify what is meant by safe operational distances in different scenarios in which ships encounter each other at sea. What is unsafe behavior? I think the Western Pacific Naval Symposium is a good place for countries to tackle this challenge, and I hope they do so. A second area would be, what are rules of behavior for military aircraft encounters? There is no established normative rule around this, but to lower risk, I think it'll be important for us to establish certain expectations. And then third, what are appropriate uses and limits on uses of autonomous weapon systems? As more of these systems are deployed, I think it'll become increasingly urgent that there be some development of normative behavior around the limits of these uses. And I think that the 1972 Incidents at Sea Agreement hopefully could offer a certain degree of inspiration and precedent for this type of effort. Next slide, please. The third line of effort that I would propose is on developing a more integrated common operating picture of what's going on in the maritime space in the Asia Pacific. I think that the Information Fusion Center in Singapore has done a noble and valuable job of expanding the common operating picture. It has raised risk to pirates and to others who would seek to disrupt lawful maritime activity in the region. But I think it also would be useful as a region for us to explore ways to harness this expanding maritime technology to address other challenges, whether it be in the form of illegal IUU fishing, unregulated and unreported fishing, or on transparency around natural resource exploration and exploitation in contested areas. The more transparent countries' behaviors are in seabed and other exploration and exploitation, I think the higher the threshold will be for countries to act unilaterally in these areas in ways that could lead to escalation. But I also hope that it's possible for us collectively to seize opportunities from crises, to forge habits of coordination when we respond to incidents and events, such as we did after the 2004 tsunami and the 2011 triple crisis in Japan. Humanitarian assistance and disaster relief often are accessible areas for countries to come together in common pursuit. Next slide, please. The fourth and final line of effort that I would suggest that we consider is on maximizing the usefulness of existing dialogue mechanisms. I think that many of you in the room recognize that there is an abundance of maritime dialogue mechanisms in Asia, but it's unclear how well coordinated they all are with each other, and whether they are sequenced and timed in ways that generate momentum and cumulative progress across the various dialogue mechanisms. And so there may be value in having a group of former officials come together to look at the dialogue architecture, to determine if the annual cycle of meetings could be organized in a different or more effective way to achieve greater progress in ways that allow the dialogues to build upon each other as they proceed throughout the year. Next. And so this is the final thought that I would just like to leave with and turn it back to Ambassador Bhakti and the panel. I think that there are a range of structural factors that are going to cause the Asian maritime domain to grow more contested, more tense in the coming years. I think it's safe to predict that great power competition is going to intensify, and that the stresses that we all feel in the international system are not going to abate anytime soon. And so this should provide a certain degree of incentive and urgency for countries in Asia to exercise agency to find ways to dampen risk of conflict and to expand space for coordination on shared challenges. If we don't, I worry that the long peace in Asia over the past 4 or 5 decades will come under growing threat. So I think that there are a few lines of effort that are available for us to make progress around building greater consensus around international law, codes of conduct, a better common operating picture, and in harmonization of dialogue mechanisms to achieve progress. But above all, thank you for this opportunity to share ideas. I look forward to the presentations from our panelists and the discussion that will follow. Thank you.
You have very nice presentations and very important presentations. So actually, Mr. Ryan has mentioned to us that actually, I mean, the maritimes in Asia Pacific is very important, yeah, and there are conflicts among the big powers in the, not superpowers, but big powers in the Asia Pacific, yeah, and there are no signs that major power competitions is in maritime Asia will abate anytime soon. Regional actors must improve their ability to manage incidents and lower risk of conflicts, yeah, in Asia Pacific, yeah. And he offered there are steps available to reduce risk, yeah. This includes forging greater commonality of the interpretations around relevant international law, and the second is broadening codes of conduct for operational behaviors, and the third is expanding practical cooperations in the maritime domain, and the last is organizing existing regional dialogues thoughtfully to spur practical progress on maritime security, in particular in the Asia Pacific. So maybe, I mean, there will be a lot of questions to you, yeah, in particular related to the role of ASEAN, yeah, as the regional organization in Southeast Asia, who also, I mean, have they have the so-called ASEAN Regional Forum, yeah, and I think the U.S. also part of that forum, including China and also European countries, yeah, outside the Southeast Asia. So thank you, Ryan. So we will discuss again after all speakers, I mean, already talked about it. Yes. There will be a statement from Ryan Haas. Okay. We will be waiting for the connection with Mr. Ryan Haas. Please. Yes. Yes, please, Ryan.
Hello, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to all of the panelists for such tremendous presentations. Yeah. Ambassador, I very much agree with your sentiment. I think that the world is undergoing the most significant power transition since the middle of the 19th century, since the 1850s, 1860s. At that time, power shifted in the global stage from Europe to North America. Now, I think, as you're describing, a lot of power is shifting from North America to the Asia Pacific. And as this power transition is taking place, it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that this trend is not disrupted by a break in the long peace in Asia. And that's why I think that, that all of these presentations and conversations have been so essential to try to surface ideas for how we can manage the tensions that are very palpable and real so that they don't derail the trend lines, which I think are working in favor of the people of this region. The second and final observation before I turn it back to you is that I thought it was really important for, at least for me, to listen to this conversation because it helped me realize how much people in the United States are so focused on the present that they're underappreciating the amount of thought that needs to be devoted to the future. You know, we in Washington are spending all of our time thinking about the war in Ukraine, dealing with Russia, dealing with China, and great power competition. You know, this is the first conversation I've been a part of where there's been a serious discussion about what role sovereignty will play in the metaverse, for example. And I appreciate our speakers bringing up these issues. So it's been an incredibly rich conversation for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryan Haas.